sun is sinking. Its last pale light bleeds into the horizon, staining the sky with muted streaks of amber and violet. Shadows stretch long across the endless plain, where frozen grasses crunch under the weight of drifting snow. Far in the distance, the sharp wall of a glacier glows faintly, like a mountain carved from glass. A bitter wind rolls across the steppe, carrying with it chill that seeps through every layer of fur and skin. It is the end of the day and the beginning of the most dangerous time, the night. For modern people, nightfall brings rest. We slip beneath blankets, turn on lamps, and find safety behind locked doors. But for Ice Age humans, darkness was never peaceful. It was hostile, uncertain, and often lethal. As the sun vanished, the world became colder than any modern winter, and survival became a question not of comfort, but of life and death. This was the late Pleistocene, around 20,000 years ago, when much of the planet was locked in the grip of the last great ice age. Vast sheets of ice covered northern lands, pressing southward like frozen giants. The climate was unforgiving. Long winters, short summers, violent winds, and temperatures that could drop lower than minus 30 degrees. For people living without technology, without central heating or insulated shelters, the cold itself was a predator. And yet, scattered across these lands were small groups of human beings, our own species, Homo sapiens, and sometimes their cousins, the Neanderthals. They were not masters of the world. They were fragile, exposed, and always outnumbered by forces stronger than themselves. Mammoths towered above them. Cave lions stalked the edges of the night. Packs of dire wolves prowled with unrelenting hunger. But perhaps the greatest enemy was not beast or blade. It was the winter itself. Imagine a band of hunters returning from a long day. The carcass of a reindeer has been hauled across miles of snow, every muscle burning with exhaustion. They reach the place where they had once kindled a fire, but the flame has been lost to the wind. No glowing embers remain. The dry grasses they gathered are damp with frost, useless for striking sparks. As the last light fades, reality sinks in. There will be no fire tonight. The cold does not wait. Within minutes, it bites at exposed skin. Numbness creeps into fingers and toes, robbing them of dexterity. Within an hour, shivers shake the body violently, a desperate attempt to generate heat. Beyond that lies the creeping fog of hypothermia, confusion, weakness, and, if unchecked, death. Without fire, warmth must come from something else. Now imagine huddling together. Men, women, children, pressed close, their fur-wrapped bodies sharing heat in silence. The sound of the wind is broken by the whimper of a child, quickly muffled against a parent's chest. Above, the stars sharpen into diamond points against the black sky. For us, they might seem beautiful. For them, they were reminders of exposure, of vastness, of how small and fragile human beings were against the weight of nature. But it was not only cold they feared. Darkness concealed predators. The cave lion, a beast larger than any modern lion, prowled the plains with patient steps. The saber-toothed cat, with its dagger-like fangs, was a shadow that slipped silently through the snow. Dire wolves moved in packs, coordinated and relentless. Without fire, there was no circle of light to keep these hunters at bay. The humans relied instead on silence, on stillness, and on the strength of numbers. Yet even here, under the cruelest conditions, they endured. For tens of thousands of years, they found ways to push through nights that should have killed them. Their survival was not accidental. It was earned through ingenuity, through cooperation, and through an intimate knowledge of the land. They knew where to find windbreaks among rocks, how to dig shallow hollows in the snow to block the wind, and how to wrap themselves in the thickest furs until body heat could turn a fragile shelter into a cocoon of life. Fire may have been central to their existence, but it was never guaranteed. Sparks could fail. Storms could smother flames. And when that happened, survival meant turning to other strategies. Warmth had to come from shelter, from clothing, from each other, and from the sheer will to see the dawn as we step into this world. It is important to strip away the comfort of our own lives. There were no blankets pulled from cupboards, no heaters humming in the corner, no soft glow of lamps to ease the fear of dark. There was only the bite of the wind, the blackness of night, and the knowledge that failure to endure meant death before morning. And yet they lived. They raised children, hunted mighty animals, painted on the walls of caves, and left behind traces of ingenuity that we still uncover today. Their survival on those coldest nights is the reason we are here. This is the story we will follow. How cavemen, against the harshest winters of the Ice Age, found ways to endure nights without fire. We will trace the shelters they built, the furs they wore, the foods that fueled them, the rituals that gave them hope, and the bonds that kept them alive when nature seemed determined to erase them. Our journey begins here, with the setting sun over a frozen steppe, with darkness spreading and cold descending like an invisible predator. Each heartbeat in that night was a question. Will warmth be found, or will the cold claim another life? The answer lies in the ingenuity of our ancestors, and in the legacy of survival that still burns within us today. This is the opening chapter of how humanity braved the coldest nights of the Ice Age and lived to see the dawn. The Ice Age was not a single winter, nor a passing storm, but an era that reshaped the very face of the planet. For nearly 2 million years, Earth cycled through glacial periods, but the one that most concerns our story is the last glacial maximum, peaking around 20,000 years ago. During this time, the climate of the world was unlike anything we know today. To walk across Ice Age Europe or North America was to step into a realm sculpted by cold, ruled by ice, and haunted by extremes of both beauty and brutality. Picture the landscape. Imagine endless fields of snow stretching beyond the horizon. Glaciers tower like frozen cliffs, sometimes rising hundreds of meters high, pressing southward like silent giants. They scraped the land bare, grinding rock into powder, leaving behind valleys of barren stone. Rivers froze solid, and lakes became vast mirrors locked beneath layers of ice. Even in summer, the air remained sharp, carrying a chill that never quite lifted. For humans, this was not scenery. It was survival's backdrop. The Ice Age world was colder, drier, and more volatile than ours. Winters stretched for months without mercy, and nights could plunge into temperatures as low as -30 or even -40 degrees Celsius. The air itself seemed to steal warmth from the skin. Storms would rise suddenly, sweeping across the plains with blinding snow and wind strong enough to tear apart shelters. For those caught unprepared, the line between life and death was measured in minutes. Unlike today, where forests cover much of Europe and North America, Ice Age landscapes were often treeless, vast steppes stretching for miles. This environment, called a mammoth steppe, supported huge herds of animals: reindeer, bison, woolly mammoths, and woolly rhinoceroses. These creatures provided food, clothing, and tools, but they also meant humans had to travel constantly to follow the herds. Migration brought new challenges. Every step into unfamiliar land carried the risk of exposure, of storm, of nights without proper shelter. The harshness of climate was not uniform everywhere. In some regions, such as southern Europe, conditions were slightly milder, allowing forests to survive and offering caves that provided natural shelter. But further north, in places like Central and Eastern Europe or Siberia, the winters were devastating. Here, snow covered the ground for most of the year, and the cold seeped deep into the earth. There was no escape, no easy refuge. For the humans who lived there, survival was a constant negotiation with the cold. To understand the brutality of this climate, imagine the contrast with our world today. A modern person might step outside into a chilly night, bundled in synthetic jackets, boots, gloves, and scarves. Even then, They would struggle to endure hours in the open without discomfort. Now strip away those modern luxuries. Replace nylon with animal hides. Replace heated houses with caves or makeshift huts. Remove every trace of modern convenience, and you begin to glimpse the fragility of human life in such a setting. The cold of the Ice Age was relentless. It was not only the temperature, but the length of time endured. Winters dragged on endlessly. Summers were short, often cool, and insufficient to melt away the deep frost. The growing season for plants was stunted, meaning vegetation was scarce. This forced humans into a heavy reliance on animals, not only for meat but for fat, for hides, for bones to shape into tools. Every kill mattered, not just as food but as insulation, as weapons, as survival itself. Archaeological evidence gives us striking glimpses into this reality. At sites like Dolní Věstonice in the Czech Republic, researchers have uncovered traces of mammoth bone huts. These shelters, some ringed with massive bones and tusks, were layered with hides and possibly snow to create insulation. The fact that such constructions existed at all reveals how desperate the cold must have been. Wood was scarce. Stone alone could not keep out the wind. Only the bones of giants were sufficient to anchor walls against the climate's fury. Even in caves, where many humans sought refuge, the cold penetrated. Archaeologists studying ancient hearths often find evidence of repeated fire-making, layer upon layer of ash. This was not luxury, it was necessity. A single lapse, a night when fire failed or fuel ran out, could mean frostbite or worse. And then there was the wind. Ice Age wind swept across open steppes with ferocity. Modern scientists suggest wind speeds could have reached hurricane levels during storms, driving snow into blinding sheets. For exposed humans, this meant not only cold but disorientation. To be caught in such a storm without shelter was to vanish into the white, swallowed by snow and silence. But perhaps the most dangerous element of the Ice Age climate was its unpredictability. While glaciers created long-term cold, sudden fluctuations still occurred. There were moments when temperatures could plummet drastically within hours, catching humans off guard. A day spent hunting could end in disaster if weather turned without warning. This unpredictability bred caution, and over time, it bred skill. To survive the Ice Age climate was not simply to endure cold. It was to read the land, to sense storms, to prepare always for the worst. Yet amid this brutality, life persisted. Herds of animals thrived on the frozen steppes, grazing on hardy grasses that pushed up through permafrost. Their presence gave humans a means to adapt. Woolly mammoths provided not only sustenance but raw materials for survival. Reindeer migrations guided human movements, offering both food and hides. Even predators such as wolves, dangerous at first, eventually became allies, their warmth and companionship shared by humans who began the first steps toward domestication. The climate shaped everything: diet, shelter, migration, and even culture. Myths, rituals, and art were born in the shadow of the cold. Cave paintings of bison, mammoths, and reindeer may have been more than art. They may have been prayers for survival, a way to call abundance into a world where hunger was constant. When we think of Ice Age people, we often imagine rugged survivors wrapped in fur, braving blizzards with stoic endurance. But it is crucial to remember the fragility beneath that image. They were as human as we are. They felt fear as the wind howled outside. They felt despair when food ran low. They felt relief when spring finally softened the earth. The climate tested not just their bodies but their spirits. And this is where the contrast lies. The Ice Age climate was brutal, merciless, and often deadly. But it was also the forge in which human resilience was tempered. It forced cooperation, ingenuity, and endurance. Without its harsh lessons, humanity may never have developed the skills that carried us into the modern world. As the long night fell over Ice Age landscapes, the cold pressed in and the wind swept across frozen plains. Every breath was a reminder of fragility. Yet every dawn was proof that survival was possible. It is within this setting, the brutal climate itself, that the story of human endurance truly begins. Fire is often imagined as humanity's eternal companion. We picture cavemen huddled around glowing embers, flames flickering against cave walls, warmth spreading through the night. But in the world of the Ice Age, fire was not a guarantee. It was a fragile gift, precious, unpredictable, and all too easy to lose. For early humans, the flame was not something conjured instantly at will. It had to be nurtured, carried, and protected. Archaeological evidence shows that fire-making tools, such as flint and pyrite for striking sparks, were known, but even with skill, success was not certain. A sudden gust of wind could scatter embers. Damp fuel could choke smoke instead of flame. A snowstorm could drown sparks before they ever caught. And sometimes, despite preparation, fire simply refused to come to life. Imagine the stakes. A group traveling across the tundra may have carried a burning branch wrapped in hides, trying to preserve flame across long distances. But if that branch went out, if embers cooled, the group faced a night without light or warmth. The loss of fire was not an inconvenience. It was a crisis. The fragility of fire came from its dependence on fuel. In Ice Age environments, wood was scarce. Treeless steppes offered little to burn. Some groups resorted to gathering dry grasses, animal dung, or even bones to feed their fires. Yes, bones. Burn at high heat, they release a faint flame and smoky glow. It was not ideal, but in desperate winters, nothing could be wasted. Yet, such fuel was unpredictable. Sometimes it caught, sometimes it smoldered, leaving more smoke than heat. And fire demanded constant tending. Left alone for too long, embers cooled into ash. A moment of distraction. Perhaps hunters leaving the track game, or a storm forcing the group to move, could extinguish the flame. Restarting was never certain. Each attempt to spark new fire meant striking stones again and again, catching sparks on tinder, blowing gently, shielding the fragile ember from the wind. In freezing conditions, shivering hands often failed at the delicate task. Failure meant another hour lost, another layer of body heat drained. Consider the psychological weight of this fragility. Imagine the fear creeping in as flames dwindled. Shadows lengthened. Cold seeped into bones, and the group's chatter grew quiet. The fire, once bright and alive, sputtered, shrinking into a weak glow. A child leaned close, seeking warmth, while adults blew desperately at fading embers. Every breath carried urgency. If the flame died, so might they. Archaeological sites remind us of this struggle. Hearths discovered in caves and shelters often show repeated layers of ash and charcoal, evidence of countless fires built and rebuilt. Each one a lifeline in a world where survival depended on heat. Some sites reveal clusters of hearths, suggesting that groups made multiple attempts, perhaps hedging against failure. Fire was not only warmth but insurance. But sometimes the evidence shows absence. In some living sites, traces of occupation exist without hearths. These moments, when no fire was present, raise haunting questions. Did the group fail to kindle flame? Were they forced to endure cold nights without it? Or were they traveling, caught in open terrain where no shelter allowed a fire to survive the wind? Whatever the reason, these fireless nights must have pressed humans to their limits. Without fire, darkness became complete. Stars offered no heat. The moon, if visible, gave only pale illumination. Predators could approach unseen. Every sound beyond the shelter, the crunch of snow, the low growl of wolves, the whisper of movement, carried amplified danger. Fire was more than warmth. It was a barrier, a warning signal to wild. Without it, fear multiplied. Yet necessity taught adaptation. When flames failed, humans turned other means. They thickened their bedding with grasses, and moss. They wrapped themselves in layers of skins. Sometimes sleeping multiple people under the same hide conserve heat. They sought natural shelters, caves, rock overhangs, or snow drifts that blocked the wind. Body heat became a substitute for flame. A circle of people pressed together could maintain warmth through the long hours until dawn. Even so, the absence of fire was a reminder of vulnerability. For every successful night around glowing embers, there were nights of silence, cold, and unease. The fragility of fire etched itself deeply into human memory. It is perhaps why fire became sacred in so many ancient traditions. From the hearths of early villages to the eternal flames of myth, fire was never taken for granted. It was revered because it was fragile, and because its absence was terrifying. The contrast could not be sharper. The glow of flames meant safety, community, and life. Its loss meant cold, darkness, and the threat of death. This constant tension shaped human ingenuity. Over generations, people became masters at coaxing flame from reluctant sparks, at carrying embers across distances, at protecting fire as though it were a living companion. When we think of our ancestors surviving the Ice Age, it is easy to imagine that fire was always there, burning bright against the cold. But the truth is more precarious. Fire was often fleeting, delicate, vulnerable to wind, water, and time. And on the nights when it failed, when a hearth lay dark and cold, humanity turned inward to shelter, to clothing, to each other, finding resilience in the absence of flame. It is in this fragility that the true power of human endurance is revealed. Fire was never guaranteed. And yet, even without it, they endured. When fire faltered, when winds howled and snow pressed down upon the land, one thing stood between Ice Age humans and death: shelter. In a world where the cold could strip warmth from a body in minutes, the need for protection from the elements was constant and urgent. Shelter was not merely a convenience. It was survival itself. But the shelters of the Ice Age were not the sturdy homes we know today. They were improvised, fragile, often temporary. They were born of necessity, built from the materials at hand, and adapted to the harsh demands of the environment. To enter one of these ancient refuges was to step into the very heartbeat of human resilience. The most iconic form of shelter was a cave. Across Europe and Asia, caves offered natural protection from wind, snow, and predators. Their stone walls absorbed heat slowly, but once warmed by fire and bodies, they could hold warmth longer than the open air. Archaeological sites such as Cavemen in France or Shanidar in Iraq reveal traces of repeated human occupation. Hearts blackened against cave walls, bones scattered across floors, pigments mixed into artwork. These were not just places of survival. They became homes, sanctuaries, even temples of the spirit. Yet caves were not always available. Some regions lacked them entirely. Others were already occupied by bears, lions, or rival groups of humans. To claim a cave often meant to fight for it. And even when won, caves had limitations. Their interiors could be damp, dark, and difficult to ventilate. Smoke from fires clung to ceilings, coating them in black soot. The glow of flame illuminated only part of the chamber, leaving shadows deep and heavy. So when caves could not be used, humans turned to ingenuity. On the treeless mammoth steppe, where wood was scarce, people constructed huts from the bones of giants. Archaeological discoveries at sites like Prehistoric in Ukraine reveal astonishing structures. Mammoth skulls, ribs, and tusks arranged in circular foundations, covered with hides and insulated with layers of earth and snow. These huts could be impressive in scale, some large enough to house entire families, perhaps even small groups working together. To step inside such a dwelling was to find not luxury, but a fragile cocoon against the wind. Snow itself became a tool. Just as modern Arctic peoples carved igloos, Ice Age humans likely built shelters by piling snow and carving hollows within. Snow, though cold to the touch, insulates remarkably well. A chamber dug into a drift could trap body heat, keeping the interior far warmer than the outside air. Archaeological traces of such temporary shelters are harder to find, but ethnographic parallels with Inuit and Siberian groups suggest that Ice Age people almost certainly used the same techniques. Grass and branches offered another layer of defense. In regions with sparse vegetation, dried grasses were gathered and layered as bedding, reducing contact with frozen ground. Branches, when available, were stacked into crude lean-tos, then covered with hides or snow. Such structures might not last long, but even a thin wall blocking the wind could mean the difference between frostbite and survival. Inside these shelters, life condensed into the most basic rhythms. Families pressed close, wrapped in furs, breathing warm air into enclosed spaces. Children were kept at the center, shielded by adults whose own bodies served as insulation. Bedding was layered thick with moss, straw, and hides. In some shelters, archaeologists find raised platforms built from stone or bone, lifting sleepers off the frozen ground. Every small adjustment added to the fight against cold. But shelter was never static. It had to be built, abandoned, and rebuilt as groups moved with migrating herds. Mobility was essential. Humans were not farmers tied to a single place. They were nomads, following the rhythm of seasons and animals. Their shelters had to be portable, adaptable. Hides could be stretched between poles to form tents, similar to later teepees and yurts. Though few physical traces remain, post holes and patterns in the soil suggest temporary structures once stood where mammoth bones alone cannot explain habitation. Consider the skill required. Every element, from where to dig, to how to stack, to which materials to use, demanded intimate knowledge of the land. A shelter placed in the wrong spot might collapse under snow. One built too close to an exposed ridge could be torn apart by wind. A careless opening might let predators sniff out the scent of food. And yet, time after time, humans succeeded. Their very survival is proof. Shelters also provided more than warmth. They were the heart of community. Within their walls, stories were told, tools were crafted, rituals performed. Imagine the sound. The crackle of a small fire, the murmur of voices, the rasp of stone on stone as a tool was sharpened. Outside, the wind shrieked across frozen plains. Inside, life endured, fragile, but enduring all the same. The contrast is striking. Outside, chaos and danger. Inside, a pocket of safety carved by human hands. This duality shaped not only survival, but identity. Shelter was not just a structure. It was a symbol of mastery, a statement that even in the harshest world, humans could carve out space to belong. Evidence also suggests that shelters were sometimes decorated, or at least arranged with symbolic care. Skulls of mammoths may have been placed intentionally, perhaps to mark territory or honor the animals that provided survival. In caves, walls were painted with animals, perhaps invoking protection. These acts transformed shelters from mere refuges into cultural spaces, linking survival with meaning. But not all nights ended safely. Shelters could fail. Roofs collapsed under heavy snow. Fires smoked the air until suffocation threatened. Predators sometimes broke in, dragging off the weak. Archaeologists have found gnawed bones in sites where humans and carnivores competed for space. To sleep, even inside a shelter, was never fully safe. Yet it was safer than nothing. And sometimes that margin was all that mattered. Through these shelters, we see the adaptability of the human spirit. Where there were caves, humans claimed them. Where there were no caves, they built with bones, hides, snow, and earth. Where resources were scarce, they improvised. They transformed hostile environments into places where children could be raised, meals could be shared, and hope could be kept alive until spring returned. The Ice Age demanded constant innovation. Every shelter was an answer to a question posed by nature. Can you endure one more night? And every dawn was proof that the answer, at least this time, was yes. Before the invention of houses with walls, before the weaving of fabrics or the stitching of wool, humanity's first shield against the Ice Age was worn directly on the body. Clothing was not an accessory. It was a survival tool. And in the frozen heart of the Pleistocene, it was crafted almost entirely from the animals that humans hunted. Every pelt, every hide, every scrap of fur carried life within its fibers. To strip the skin from a reindeer, bison, or mammoth was to claim more than meat. It was to claim armor against the cold. Archaeological discoveries reveal that humans developed clothing tens of thousands of years ago, long before farming or metal. The survival of our species depended on it. Animal skins were not all equal. Thick mammoth hides offered heavy, durable protection, but they were cumbersome to wear. Reindeer and caribou provided lighter furs, excellent for insulation and mobility. Wolf and fox pelts were prized for their softness, often used around the neck, face, or hands where heat escaped fastest. Archaeologists studying microscopic where on bone awls and needles have found traces of hide work dating back at least 30,000 years, evidence that clothing was carefully constructed, not merely draped. But making clothing was no simple task. Once an animal was killed, its skin had to be prepared. Fresh hides stiffened quickly. Untreated, they hardened into unusable slabs. Ice Age humans scraped flesh and fat away with stone tools, then stretched skins to dry. Some were softened with animal brains, whose oils broke down fibers, leaving hide supple. Others may have been smoked over fire, adding preservation and resistance against decay. This was slow, dirty work, but essential. Once softened, hides were cut and shaped. Early bone needles, drilled with tiny eyes, show that humans stitched pieces together with sinew, the tough cord stripped from muscles or tendons. Imagine the patience. Piercing hide, pulling through thread, knotting tight with hands stiff from cold. A cloak, hood, or pair of leggings could take days to craft. Yet each garment was a layer of life. Layering was key. Ethnographic studies of Arctic peoples, whose lifestyles echo those of Ice Age ancestors, reveal the wisdom of wearing multiple furs. A softer skin might be worn inside, for facing the body for insulation. Over this, a thicker hide created an outer barrier, blocking wind and snow. Hooded cloaks, fur boots, and mittens completed the protection. With such clothing, humans transformed themselves into moving shelters, carrying warmth wherever they traveled. But clothing was not only functional, it was symbolic. In some burials, archaeologists have found individuals laid to rest in carefully prepared garments, decorated with beads, shells, or dyed fibers. This suggests that clothing carried meaning beyond survival. It expressed identity, status, perhaps even spiritual belief. To wear the skin of an animal may have been to honor it, to claim its strength, or to connect with its spirit. Still, the contrast between life with clothing and life without it was immense. A single night without furs and sub-zero temperatures could be fatal. Naked skin, exposed to howling wind, would burn with cold before numbing into silence. Frostbite, hypothermia, death, all lurked outside the protection of hides. With clothing, however, humans gained mobility. They could hunt farther, travel longer, sleep outside fire's glow. Clothing expanded the boundaries of survival. Consider the children of the Ice Age. Wrapped tightly in reindeer furs, swaddled against their mother's chests, they carried the warmth of both body and skin. Without this, infant mortality would have soared. Each stitch sewn into clothing was a thread connecting generations, ensuring not just the survival of hunters, but of families, communities, entire cultures. Clothing also reflected adaptation to environment. In tundra regions, garments were heavy and layered, suited for constant snow. In more temperate zones, hides may have been thinner, worn more loosely, adjusted seasonally. This adaptability gave humans an edge over other species. Neanderthals, though skilled at survival, may not have developed the same sophistication in tailored clothing. Their heavier reliance on caves and bulkier hides might have limited mobility. Homo sapiens, with carefully fitted garments, could move swiftly across landscapes, chase prey, and colonize new regions. Clothing, then, was not just protection. It was a weapon of expansion. The work of making garments was likely shared. While hunters tracked animals, others prepared hides. This division of labor ensured efficiency. It also meant that survival depended on cooperation. A poorly made cloak could doom its wearer. A carefully crafted hood could save a life. In this sense, clothing embodied community as much as survival. Even footwear carried weight. Archaeological evidence from sites in Siberia and Europe suggests that people crafted moccasin-like shoes from hides, stuffed with grasses for insulation. Without protection for feet, mobility would have been crippled. The simple act of wrapping fur around toes determined whether humans could follow herds, cross icy rivers, or escape predators. And then there's the sensory memory. The feel of rough fur against skin, the smell of smoke lingering in hides, the sound of sinew threads stretching as garments moved. These sensations were constant companions, shaping the daily experience of Ice Age life. For us, clothing is ordinary. For them, it was the border between life and death. Yet clothing was never invincible. Wet hides grew heavy, freezing stiff in bitter winds. Repair was constant. Threads replaced, holes patched with scraps, tears mended by hand. Each garment carried scars, echoes of both animal hunted and human struggle. Clothing wore down as quickly as the bodies within, demanding endless cycles of renewal. And still, despite the fragility, it worked, wrapped in layers of skin. Humans crossed glaciers, survived blizzards, endured nights without fire. They turned prey into protection, transforming vulnerability into strength. Each pelt was a triumph. Each stitch seemed a defiance of winter's grip. The contrast remained sharp. Without hides, humanity would have remained bound to warmer climates, unable to push northward into frozen lands. With them, we became explorers, conquerors of cold, masters of adaptation. Animal skins were not just garments. They were passports of survival, tickets into territories where few creatures dare to walk. And so, when we imagine Ice Age people moving across snowy plains, it is not only the weapons in their hands or the fires they carried that secured their future. It was also the cloaks on their backs, the hoods over their heads, the boots on their feet. They carried warmth with them, stitched from the very creatures they hunted. And in doing so, they carried humanity forward into new worlds. When the fire went out and the wind crept in, when shelter stood but still leaked cold through their walls, the final barrier between Ice Age humans and death was the human body itself. In the silence of the long winter night, warmth was preserved not by technology alone, but by instinct, intimacy, and strategy. Sleep was not merely rest. It was a nightly battle for survival. The ground was the first enemy. Frozen earth sucked heat from the body faster than open air. To lie directly upon it was to invite hypothermia. Archaeologists studying ancient sites have found traces of bedding made from grasses, reeds, moss, and animal skins. Layered thickly, these materials acted as insulation, lifting the body away from the icy floor. Some groups even built raised sleeping platforms from bones or stones, creating primitive beds where air, rather than frozen soil, pressed below. Every layer mattered. A single extra pelt could mean the difference between shivering through the night and slipping into fatal sleep. Yet insulation was only half the solution. The true secret weapon was body heat. Humans discovered long ago what modern Arctic explorers and mountaineers know, that pressing together conserves warmth. Families, entire groups, often slept in tight clusters. Adults curled around children, pairs spooned beneath heavy hides, and sometimes a whole group formed a huddle bodies arranged like spokes of a wheel. Warm breath filled the shared space, creating a pocket of heat that resisted the deadly chill outside. Ethnographic parallels with the Inuit, Sami, and other northern peoples reveal similar practices. Anthropologists have recorded how, even into recent centuries, families slept side by side under communal coverings, using body heat as their furnace. The Ice Age, harsher still, would have demanded this instinct. The lonely sleeper risked freezing. The communal sleeper increased their chance of greeting dawn. Intimacy was not optional. It was survival. And yet, even in such closeness, danger lurked. Crowded shelters produced dampness. Condensed breath frosted walls, wetting hides, sometimes freezing them stiff. Too much moisture threatened to chill sleepers further. Balance had to be struck. Warmth enough to endure, airflow enough to prevent suffocation, and damp. Fire, when available, helped, but on fireless nights the group relied solely on the rhythm of lungs and hearts. Clothing remained part of sleep strategy. By day, furs protected against wind and snow. By night, they became blankets, doubled into bedding or layered tighter around the body. Some skins may have been reserved specifically for rest. Heavier hides too cumbersome for travel, but perfect for covering a family in stillness. Archaeological evidence of wear patterns on hides suggests repeated folding and laying, hints of their role as bedding. Position also mattered. Anthropologists studying survival behaviors note that curling into a fetal position reduces surface area exposed cold, preserving core warmth. Likely, Ice Age humans instinctively adopted similar postures. Children may have been swaddled tightly in skins, pressed against adults for additional protection. The body became architecture, arranged not for comfort, but for efficiency of heat. The act of sleeping itself was risky. In the absence of firelight, predators prowled unseen. Wolves, cave hyenas, even lions haunted the night. To drift into deep sleep meant lowering defenses. Groups may have rotated watch duties, with one or two members staying lightly awake to listen for danger, while others rested. The warmth of the huddle had to be balanced with vigilance. Survival demanded both. Consider the psychological toll. Imagine the exhaustion of hunters returning after a day of tracking herds across frozen plains. Their bodies ached, lungs burned with icy air, bellies rumbled with hunger. Yet even then, sleep was not a gentle release. It was a conscious strategy: where to lie, how to arrange bodies, how many hides to layer, who would stay alert. Rest became another form of planning, another weapon in the war against cold. And still, sleep offered more than survival. Within those close clusters, bonds deepened. Children listened to the breathing of parents, learning the rhythms of trust. Couples shared warmth that carried into intimacy, sustaining family lines. Stories may have been whispered in the dark. Songs hummed to calm children. Prayers murmured to unseen spirits. The night, though cold, was also a place of connection. To share breath and warmth was to affirm belonging, to remind each other that they were not alone in a world of ice. The archaeological record offers quiet testimony. In sites across Europe, traces of overlapping hearths and bedding areas suggest communal sleeping spaces rather than individual ones. At Dolní Věstonice in the Czech Republic, the remains of huts show evidence of families clustering together. Burials, too, sometimes place bodies side by side, perhaps echoing the way they once lay in life. The intimacy of survival left marks not just in memory, but in the earth itself. Still, contrast remains sharp, the danger of sleeping versus the safety it promised. To sleep carelessly, exposed, unprotected, alone, was to risk never waking. To sleep wisely, insulated, clustered, watchful, was to turn vulnerability into strength. Each night was a gamble, a test repeated countless times across generations. That humanity endured is proof of the strategy's effectiveness. Even today, echoes remain. Campers know the warmth of shared tent. Soldiers a closeness of trench rest. Mountaineers a life-saving embrace of a bivouac partner. These instincts are ancient, carved into our survival memory during nights when wolves howled, fires failed, and the only heat left was human. The sleeping strategies of Ice Age humans remind us of a truth both simple and profound. Our species did not endure winter alone. We endured together. Warmth came not only from skins and fires, but from closeness, the beating of hearts in the dark, the rhythm of shared breath, the silent trust that another body could keep you alive. In that trust lay the foundation of community, the seed of culture, and perhaps the first dreams of humanity. In the Ice Age world, survival was never guaranteed. The cold gnawed constantly at the body, and the only way to resist it was through fuel. Shelter and skins could hold back the wind, but inside the body, warmth came from food. Every heartbeat, every shiver, every breath of warm air cost energy. And so, hunting was not only about hunger. It was about fire inside the body, a fire fed by meat and fat. The prey of Ice Age hunters was immense. Herds of reindeer and bison swept across plains. Woolly mammoths trudged in slow majesty, their bodies enormous stores of fat and hide. Even smaller animals, hares, foxes, birds, played their part. Each one carried calories, and calories were heat. When hunters raised their spears or set their traps, they were fighting not only for food, but for warmth itself. Fat was a treasure. Archaeological studies of butchered bones reveal that Ice Age people often broke them open to reach the marrow within. This soft, rich substance was pure energy, concentrated warmth. Fat burned longer inside the body than lean meat, sustaining people through long nights. Even today, scientists studying Arctic survival note the importance of fat-heavy diets in extreme cold. Protein alone is not enough. It can fill the stomach, but starves the body of usable energy. Fat, by contrast, fuels a furnace. Imagine a kill on the open steppe. Hunters track a bison for hours, moving silently across snow. Spears are thrown, shouts rise, the beast crashes down. When it falls, the urgency does not end. The animal must be butchered quickly before scavengers arrive or freezing winds stiffen the flesh. Knives of flint slice into hide, stripping away skin that will later become clothing. Beneath lies the red wealth of meat. Some is eaten immediately, raw or roasted over fire. The rest is carried back to camp, shared among the group. Every piece has value. Nothing is wasted. In especially harsh winters, meat itself could be preserved by the very cold that threatened life. Frozen slabs of mammoth or reindeer could last for weeks, stored beneath snow or in shaded pits. Archaeologists have found cut marks on bones that suggest long-term processing, scraping, storing, returning later to harvest more. These methods ensure that warmth could be rationed, stretched across seasons when hunting grew thin. But food was not always plentiful. There were times when herds migrated beyond reach, when storms trapped hunters, when hunger pressed hard. In these moments, the line between survival and death narrowed sharply. Some groups turned to scavenging, trailing predators, waiting for lions or wolves to leave scraps behind. Others dug up cache meat left earlier, or boiled bones repeatedly to extract every last trace of fat. Archaeological sites reveal piles of cracked bones, evidence of this desperate but ingenious practice. The connection between food and heat was direct, felt in the body. After a meal heavy in fat, warmth spread to the limbs, energy returning to tired muscles. On empty stomachs, however, cold struck harder. Shivering increased, hands stiffened, thoughts slowed. To go without food in the Ice Age was to invite cold deeper into the body. Survival required a steady rhythm of hunting, eating, and resting. Hunting itself demanded extraordinary skill. The tools were simple: Spears tipped with stone, atlatls to extend the arm's reach, traps made from pits and snares. Yet the strategy was sophisticated. Hunters knew the migration routes of herds, the weak points of massive animals, the moments when snow or rivers made prey vulnerable. Cooperation was essential. Alone, a hunter stood little chance against a mammoth or bison. Together, coordinated groups could bring down giants. The reward was immense. Not only food for days, but fat enough to keep a whole band warm through bitter weeks. Sharing was as important as killing. Archaeological evidence suggests that meat was divided among group members, not hoarded. This ensured that everyone stayed alive, not just the hunters. A well-fed group could care for children, tend shelters, prepare hides. A starving one would collapse. Food was both nourishment and glue for society. To share it was to affirm survival together. But hunting was not without risk. Prey fought back. Mammoths could crush hunters underfoot. Bison gored with sharp horns. Even smaller animals could injure, their escape wasting precious energy. Failure meant more than empty stomachs. It meant exposure. Without meat, warmth slipped away. The contrast was stark. Success meant life and fire inside the body. Failure meant cold and despair. In this struggle, humans developed rituals around hunting. Cave paintings of animals, etched deep in stone, may not only have been art, but acts of hope. Prayers for successful hunts. Invocations for strength. To honor the animal was to respect the gift of warmth it provided. Some groups may have believed the spirit of the prey lingered in the meat and fat, offering its strength to those who consumed it. Eating became not only survival, but communion with the world around them. Evidence also suggests that humans used fire to process fat further. Bones placed near hearths show burn marks, perhaps from melting marrow or rendering grease. Fat could be smeared on skins for waterproofing, burned in lamps for light, or stored for later use. Every function came back to survival. Fat was not just food, it was a multi-purpose tool in the Ice Age toolkit. The rhythm of hunting and eating defined life. Days of hunger built into desperation, followed by feasts that renewed spirits. Around fires, bellies full of fat and meat, warmth spread not only physically but emotionally. Stories were told, bonds reinforced, hope rekindled. Contrast that with nights of failure, when hunters returned empty-handed. In those times, silence hung heavy, fear pressed close, and the cold felt sharper. Modern science confirms what Ice Age people knew in their bones. That diet shaped survival. A balance of protein and fat is crucial, but in extreme cold, fat reigns supreme. Without it, the body weakens, unable to produce enough heat. With it, endurance stretches further, resilience deepens. The hunters of the Ice Age may not have known the biology, but they knew the truth. Fat was warmth, and warmth was life. And so, every spear thrown, every trap set, every chase across snow carried more than a hope of food. It carried the promise of survival, the fire that burned inside the body, the strength to endure another frozen dawn. Hunting was not simply the pursuit of prey. It was a pursuit of warmth of life itself, drawn from the bodies of the animals who shared the Ice Age world. When we imagine prehistoric meals, we often picture glowing hearths, meat roasting over open flames, the smell of smoke drifting through a cave. Yet in the Ice Age, fire was not always available. Flames could die out in storms. Fuel might be scarce, or the group might be traveling in open terrain with no chance to strike sparks. And still, people had to eat. Fireless meals were reality, born of necessity, and they revealed just how inventive and resilient our ancestors were. The first and simplest solution was to eat food raw. Freshly killed animals provided meat that could be sliced and consumed without cooking. Archaeological evidence of butchery marks shows how Ice Age hunters quickly stripped muscle and fat from bones in the field. Eating raw carried risks. Parasites and bacteria lurked in the flesh, but in desperate conditions, the priority was energy, not safety. A mouthful of raw fat, rich and oily, delivered warmth in a way no empty stomach could. Hunters often ate on the spot, consuming liver, marrow, or fat immediately after the kill, before carrying the rest back to camp. These nutrient-rich parts provided quick fuel, crucial during exhausting hunts. But raw was not the only option. Humans found clever ways to use the environment itself as a cooking tool. One method was stone boiling, even without fire. Hot stones, heated earlier in embers, could be carried and dropped into containers of hide or stomachs of animals filled with water. The stones released heat slowly, warming food long after the fire had gone out. Archaeologists have uncovered cracked stones at ancient sites, likely evidence of this practice. Even if flames were gone by night, food could still be warm with a fading memory of fire. Snow and ice, though symbols of cold, also served as tools. Fish caught from frozen rivers could be stored in snowbanks, preserved fresh until eaten raw. Frozen meat, sliced thin, became edible even without flame, much like modern Arctic peoples eat frozen fish or seal as delicacies. The cold preserved food against rot, ensuring survival during lean months. In a paradoxical way, the very enemy of warmth became an ally of preservation. Fermentation and partial rotting may also have played a role. Some anthropologists argue that Ice Age people, like many traditional Arctic cultures, may have intentionally buried meat or fish to let ferment, softening fibers and creating digestible food even without heat. Though unappealing to modern tastes, such methods transform harsh environments into allies. A pit dug into permafrost could hold meat for weeks, turning survival into long-term planning. Chewing itself became part of the preparation. Without fire to soften fibers, teeth and jaws bore the burden. Studies of Ice Age skulls reveal heavy wear on molars, evidence of tough diets. Children likely chewed softer scraps first, while adults gnawed sinew, gristle, and hide to extract what nutrition they could. In such conditions, eating was labor, each bite a struggle between tooth and frozen flesh. Yet every chew mattered, every scrap of energy reclaimed. Plants, though scarce in winter, were not absent. Roots and tubers dug from beneath snow could be eaten raw or pounded between stones. Berries dried earlier in the year might be chewed as snacks. Even lichens and mosses, indigestible to us today, may have been boiled into broths when fire was present or chewed in emergencies when not. Archaeological residues from teeth hint at such varied diets, proving that humans drew sustenance from more than just meat. But without fire, meals lack more than flavor. They lack safety. Cooking kills parasites, softens fibers, and releases hidden nutrients. Without it, sickness loomed. Yet necessity trumped danger. A group that refused raw food would starve. Those who adapted, even at risk, lived on. This contrast, risk of illness versus certainty of hunger, shaped the resilience of human survival. Consider the experience of such meals. A family inside a dark shelter, no flames to comfort them, crouches together around a frozen slab of reindeer meat. A parent scrapes away strips with a stone blade, handing them to children who chew slowly, their breaths frosting the air. There is no glow, no smell of roasting, only the quiet gnaw of teeth and the faint sound of wind outside. It is a bleak picture, and yet it is survival. At times, resourcefulness turned meager meals into feasts, even without flame. Fat-rich marrow scooped from bones was shared like a delicacy. Dried strips of meat, hardened over past fires, could be chewed slowly, their toughness softened by saliva. Frozen fat, shaved into thin slices, melted on the tongue, releasing a burst of warmth. What thus might seem crude or harsh was, to them, a triumph, proof that hunger had been held back for another day. Archaeological finds also show evidence of food being carried over long distances. Hunters may have stored dried meat or fat within hides, keeping reserves for journeys when no fire could be lit. These provisions, though simple, extended survival, much like rations carried by explorers in later centuries. To plan food ahead was to plan life itself, and beyond practicality, there may have been ritual. Some cultures later viewed eating raw as a way of absorbing the spirit of an animal directly. Perhaps Ice Age hunters believed the same. To consume the fresh heart or liver of a kill might have symbolized taking in its strength, its essence, its warmth. Survival was physical, but meaning gave it depth, transforming bare necessity into shared belief. The contrast of fireless meals is striking. With fire, food became comfort, safety, and shared joy. Without fire, meals were cold, hard, and dangerous. Yet, both were survival. One was warmth of flame, the other the raw resilience of flesh and will. Together, they show the duality of Ice Age life. Fragile, yet enduring. Perilous, yet ingenious. Even now, echoes remain. Modern Arctic people still eat frozen fish raw, still chew marrow from bones, still practice traditions rooted in ancient survival. The techniques of fireless feasts were not failures of technology, but testaments to adaptability. They remind us that humans, when stripped of convenience, can still find nourishment in the harshest places. And so, every raw bite, every marrow scoop, every frozen slice carried more than calories. It carried defiance against cold, against hunger, against the night. Fireless meals were not moments of weakness, but of stubborn endurance. They fed the body when flames could not, keeping alive the most important fire of all, the one burning within. In the struggle against the unforgiving Ice Age, fire was not the only ally. Even when flames flickered and died, humans carried another weapon, tools. Crafted from stone, bone, antler, and hide, these objects were not mere accessories but instruments of survival. They stitched furs, carved shelters, and built the very defenses that separated warmth from death. If fire was fleeting, tools were lasting, silent companions passed from hand to hand, generation to generation. The first and most vital tool for warmth was a needle, not of steel, but of bone. Archaeologists have uncovered fine bone needles, some more than 20,000 years old, drilled with tiny eyes for thread. These fragile objects transformed hides into garments. With them, fur could be shaped into snug coats, hoods, gloves, and boots, stitched tight enough to trap air and block icy winds. The act of sewing was as crucial as the act of hunting. Without stitching, hides were loose. With it, they became true clothing, tailored armor against the cold. Each stitch was survival drawn in thread. Thread itself came from sinew, the fibrous tissue stripped from animal backs and legs. Flexible when fresh, strong when dried, sinew could be softened and twisted into cordage. Mothers, elders, and children often work hides and sinews, while hunters stalked prey, proving that survival was not the task of a single hand, but of an entire community. The rhythm of sewing, the tug of sinew through bone needles, created not just clothes, but continuity. Garments for children, hoods for infants, cloaks for elders. Every thread tied family to survival. Beyond needles, scrapers and awls were essential. Scrapers, made from sharp stone flakes, stripped flesh and fat from hides, leaving pliable material ready to be worked. Awls, sharpened bone or antler points, pierced holes through tough skin so thread could pass through. In skilled hands, these simple tools achieved wonders. A hide softened, scraped, and stitched became boots lined with fur. A crude, all-punctured seam became a lifeline on frozen ground. These tools, often overlooked, were as vital as spears and blades. Without them, warmth was lost long before food. Clothing, however, was only one front. Tools also built shelters. Stone axes and bone chisels shaped wood and ice into walls against the wind. Reindeer antlers, shed each year and gathered from tundra, were carved into digging tools to scrape snow into heaps. From these heaps, humans carved snow shelters, insulating walls thicker than fur. Antler picks dug into frozen soil, hollowing pits for windbreaks or storage. Each tool extended human reach into the frozen world, making the uninhabitable livable. Then came fire carriers, the simplest yet most profound tools. In places where striking sparks was impossible, embers were kept alive in containers of bark or bone, wrapped in moss. Such ember carriers ensured fire could be moved across miles, ready to burst into flame when fuel returned. They were tools of continuity, keeping warmth alive when a landscape seemed intent on extinguishing it. To lose one was to risk cold death. To carry one was to carry hope itself. Weapons, too, had their role in warmth. A spear tipped with flint or bone was not only a hunting tool, but promise of fur, fat, and hide. The atlatl or spear thrower extended reach, allowing hunters to strike prey from afar, minimizing risk and maximizing survival. Every tool that brought down an animal also brought warmth, for the kill yielded more than food. It yielded skin for shelter, sinew for thread, fat for insulation. Weapons were warmth disguised as danger. Even the smallest tools mattered. Flint flakes, struck from cores, served as knives to slice hides, shave wood, and scrape fat. A sharp edge, renewed again and again, ensured tasks could continue without pause. Archaeological layers of discarded flakes reveal just how central these little shards were. Each sliver of stone was a fragment of survival, each spark of craftsmanship a testament to human endurance. Crafting itself became a ritual of preparation. Long winter nights, when hunting ceased, were spent shaping tools by firelight. Children watched as elders knapped flint, learning to read the stone's hidden fractures. Women worked hides, scraping, stretching, sewing. Men repaired weapons dulled by hunts. In these moments, survival was not only immediate but generational. Knowledge passed through hands, embedded in tools. What was made in one season saved lives in the next. The artistry of tools also reveals something deeper. Bone needles polished to smooth perfection, awls decorated with carvings. Even spear throwers etched with animal shapes. These were not merely functional. They were expressions of identity, of connection to the natural world. A decorated tool was still a tool, but it also carried meaning. Perhaps it honored the animal whose bones it came from, or invoked spirits for success in hunts. Warmth, then, was not only physical but spiritual, sustained by belief as much as by craftsmanship. The contrast could not be sharper. Without tools, humans were bare, exposed, fragile against the ice age. With tools, they became adaptable, creative, able to transform hostile environments into habitable ones. Tools were multipliers of survival, amplifying human ingenuity against the immensity of cold. Where claws and fur failed, scrapers and needles triumphed. Where bare hands faltered, awls and axes persevered. The line between freezing and enduring was often drawn not by fire, but by tools. Even today, the legacy of these objects remains. The sewing needle, one of humanity's oldest inventions, still connects us to that ancient struggle. Every stitch we make, from tailored coats' protective gear, echoes those first bone needles scratching through hides in a dark cave. Every pocket knife, every crafted tool, is a faint descent of the flint and bone that once turned death into survival. In the Ice Age, warmth was not a gift. It was built, carved, scraped, stitched, carried, and fought for. And at the heart of this effort stood the tools of survival. They were not glamorous. They did not glow like fire or roar like the hunt, but they endured. They filled a gap when fire went out and winds howled. They gave shape to clothing, shelter, and hope. In the cold silence of prehistoric nights, tools were the hands of survival extended into the dark. When humans faced the merciless winters of the Ice Age, They were never truly alone. Around them moved herds of reindeer, mammoth, bison, and horse, living stores of warmth, nourishment, and survival. And beside them, sometimes padded smaller companions, the first domesticated dogs. These animals were not only prey or partners. They were allies in struggle against cold, shaping human endurance as much as humans shaped them. The hides of great beasts were the first gift. Mammoths, towering giant of the Ice Age, carried thick skins lined with dense underfur. To kill one was to secure survival for an entire band. Stripped and scraped, the hide could be stretched into vast coverings, cloaks for bodies, mats for sleeping, or even tent-like shelters. Archaeologists have uncovered mammoth bone dwellings in Eastern Europe, where curved tusks framed structures draped in hide. Inside, families huddled beneath those skins, shielded from blizzards by the very creature they had slain. Mammoth hide was not merely material. It was a fortress of flesh turned into defense against the cold. Reindeer provided similar gifts. Smaller than mammoths, but far more numerous, their hides were supple, insulating, and easier to work. Winter coats from reindeer pelts would be layered, doubling protection. Reindeer sinew stitched garments, while antlers became tools. In life, the herds were prey to hunt. In death, they were allies transformed into warmth. The cycle was brutal, yet necessary. Survival was carved from the bodies of animals. Each kill a pact between hunger and endurance. But animals offered more than hides. Fat, thick and rich, was as vital as fur. It fueled bodies starved of carbohydrates, warmed hunters trudging through snow, and even burned as light in primitive lamps. In caves across Europe, archaeologists have found stone lamps blackened with soot, their bowls filled with melted fat. A wick of moss or fiber will be set alight, glowing faintly against stone walls. In those flames, carved from an animal's body, warmth and vision returned. Fat was fire made flesh, carrying life long after the beast had fallen. Bones, too, carried purpose. Heavy mammoth femurs became tent posts. Rib cages formed windbreaks. Even marrow, sucked fresh from the cavity of cracked bones, provided not only calories but a ritual sharing. Children lit the fat from bone splinters, while adults split open larger shafts. In every fragment of animal, humans found use. Nothing was wasted. In the Ice Age, to waste was to die, and so every hide, antler, and sinew was transformed into the fabric of survival. Amid this relationship of predator and prey, another bond began to emerge. Not of death, but a companionship. Dogs, descended from wolves, crept closer to the firelight of human camps. Perhaps it began with scavenging, wolves drawn to discarded bones and scraps of fat. Over time, the boldest wolves tolerated humans, and humans tolerated them in turn. Gradually, this fragile truce deepened. Wolves became partners in hunting, their noses guiding humans to prey, their presence guarding against intruders. In return, they received scraps of food and the protection of the camp. The earliest dogs were more than hunters. They were warmth itself. In Arctic cultures, even today, dogs curl against their human companions, sharing heat during freezing nights. Imagine an Ice Age family huddled inside a mammoth hide shelter. Children pressed not only against their parents, but against shaggy wolf dogs, breathing in warmth from both species. These animals were not only tools or protectors. They were blankets, companions, guardians of the fireless dark. The alliance with dogs marked a turning point. Unlike herds that humans had to chase, kill, and process, dogs walked beside them willingly. They were living tools, yes, but also something greater, allies who chose to stay. This companionship added not only warmth but resilience. A hunter with a dog had sharper senses, greater speed, and fewer fears in the night. Survival became a shared effort, one species binding itself to another in trust. And yet, the relationship with animals was never simple. To kill a reindeer was to honor and consume it. To care for a dog was to feed it even in hunger. Ice Age people understood animals not just as resources, but as spirits woven into life itself. Cave art speaks to this bond. Painted walls of Chauvet and Lascaux teem with bison, horses, and mammoths. Animals revered, remembered, celebrated. Perhaps these depictions were gratitude, offerings in pigment to the beasts who gave life through their bodies. Warmth, then, was not merely skin on flesh, but spirit within spirit. This bond had contrasts. On one hand, the kill, blood steaming in snow, hides torn from carcasses, fat render for lamps. On the other, companionship, the soft panting of dogs, the trust of herds followed season after season. Animals were both the hunted and the allied, both death and survival. In this duality, humans carved meaning, turning necessity into relationship. Even the migrations of animals shaped human fate. Reindeer herds moved with seasons, drawing hunters after them. Mammoths roamed plains, their trails guiding paths of human settlement. To follow the herds was to follow life itself. A lost herd meant hunger. A found one meant warmth through hides, fat, and meat. In this way, animals dictated human survival as much as humans dictated theirs. Archaeological evidence reveals just how deep this connection ran. Mammoth bone dwellings, reindeer hide clothing, wolf-dog burials where animals were laid to rest beside humans. These traces whisper of a bond forged in ice. Survival was not solitary. It was a pact across species, written in blood, warmth, and companionship. Today, echoes remain. Our coats, once animal hide, are now synthetic, yet they still mimic fur. Our lamps, once fueled by fat, now glow with electricity, yet they still banish darkness. And our dogs, no longer wolves at the camp's edge, sleep at our feet as companions. These ties began in the Ice Age, when warmth meant life, and animals gave it freely or were taken for it. To survive those winters, humans needed more than clever tools or fragile fires. They needed the strength of animals, the warmth of their skins, the fuel of their fat, the companionship of their breath. Every hide stretched over a body. Every dog curled at a child's side. Every herd tracked across snow carried the same message. Humans did not endure alone. They endured because they walked, hunted, and huddled with animals. In the end, the story of Ice Age survival is not only about human ingenuity. It is about partnerships, some forced by the hunt, some born of trust. Dogs, hides, and herds were more than resources. They were the living bridge between death and survival. Through them, warmth endured in the coldest nights. Through them, life pushed forward into the frozen dawn. When we think of survival in the Ice Age, we often focus on the physical. The hides stitched into coats, the fires fed with bone and wood, the shelters carved into earth or snow. Yet survival was not only about flesh and bone. It was also about spirit. Against the vast, indifferent cold, humans turned to rituals, stories, and beliefs. These were not luxuries. They were as vital as clothing or food, for they gave meaning to suffering, comfort in the dark, and the strength to endure one more night. The cold was relentless, an ever-present adversary. To face it, people needed more than tools. They needed to believe the cold itself could be understood, tamed, or bargained with. Anthropologists studying later Arctic cultures note myths of winter spirits, icy gods, and animal protectors. It is likely Ice Age people held similar beliefs. Perhaps they whispered stories of a great beast who breathed out the blizzards, or a fire spirit hiding in stones, waiting to be struck alive. These tales turned random, brutal weather into something familiar, a foe with a face, a force that could be respected or appeased. Warmth itself may have carried sacred meaning. Fire, once lit, was not merely flame but a spirit, a living presence within the camp. Its crackle was a voice, its glow a guardian, its smoke a prayer rising to the unseen. Families likely treated the hearth with reverence, protecting embers as though they were children. To let fire die was more than carelessness. It was a spiritual failing. Archaeological traces of carefully maintained hearths suggest that fire was not left to chance. It was preserved, honored, even cherished as a heart of survival. Rituals surrounded warmth in other forms as well. The act of dressing in animal hides may have carried symbolic power. To wrap oneself in reindeer fur was not only to shield against the cold, but to take on the spirit of the reindeer. By donning a wolf pelt, one might hope to inherit its endurance, its keen senses. In this way, clothing became more than protection. It became transformation. Ice Age art supports this idea. Figurines and cave paintings sometimes show humans in animal-like forms, blurring the boundary between man and beast. Perhaps these were depictions of ritual dress, moments where humans wore the warmth of animals in their very essence at once. Songs and chants, too, may have played their part. Imagine a group huddled in a dark cave, no fire to chase away the chill. Voices rise together, low and rhythmic, echoing off stone walls. The sound builds a sense of unity, of shared purpose, as the act of singing itself generates warmth. Anthropological parallels suggest this was more than imagination. Rhythm and ritual bind communities, calming fear and creating resilience. In the Ice Age, song may have been a shield, weaving invisible threads of comfort when physical warmth was scarce. There may also have been rituals of gratitude toward the animals that gave life. A hunter, after killing a mammoth or reindeer, might place bones carefully, arrange skulls in circles, or carve images on walls to honor the fallen. Archaeological sites show evidence of deliberate placement of animal remains, suggesting that kills were marked with reverence, not randomness. In these gestures, warmth gained from hide and fat was balanced by respect, ensuring that the cycle of survival was not stripped of meaning. To give thanks was to maintain harmony with the world, to believe that future hunts and future warmth would not be denied. The contrast of warmth and cold became symbolic of life and death itself. Cold was silence, darkness, oblivion. Warmth was light, breath, and continuation. Myths likely reflected this tension. Perhaps fire was seen as a stolen gift, taken from gods or animals, always at risk of being lost. Perhaps the cold was imagined as a devouring force, endlessly hungry, always threatening to reclaim the flame. In such stories, every spark, every shared cloak, every ritual warmth carried a deeper resonance. Survival was defiance, and warmth was victory. Burial practices may also hint at these beliefs. In some Ice Age graves, bodies are found wrapped in furs, surrounded by tools, beads, and ochre. To cloak the dead in warmth suggests more than practicality. It suggests a belief that warmth was needed even beyond life, that the journey into darkness required protection, just as the journey through winter did. Fire and fur, companions in life, became companions in death as well. Even the placement of caves and art may tie to these rituals of warmth. Paintings of animals deep within caverns, lit only by flickering lamps, created a space of transformation. To step into the cave's cold darkness, light a small flame, and see walls come alive with beasts was not mere art. It was ritual. It was a reminder that warmth could awaken the world, that darkness could be filled with meaning if humans dare to carry light inside it. For children, rituals carried another purpose, teaching survival. Myths told around fires were not just stories, but lessons. A tale of a careless hunter who let the fire die might serve as warning. A legend of an ancestor guided home by a dog in a blizzard might teach respect for animal allies. These stories turn survival skills into memory, embedding wisdom in imagination. Rituals ensure that knowledge endured across generations, as unbroken as a fire in the hearth. Ultimately, rituals of warmth reveal that survival was never only physical. To endure the Ice Age required more than hides and tools. It required the ability to find meaning in hardship, to transform suffering into story, to see in every spark of flame not just heat, but hope. Cold was endless, vast, and merciless. Warmth was fragile, fleeting, and sacred. To hold on to it, humans built not only fires but myths, fires of the mind that glowed even when embers cooled. Thus, in the Ice Age night, warmth became both reality and symbol. It was the skin against the wind, the flame against the dark, the song against silence. And through ritual, it became something greater, a promise that survival had meaning, that endurance was not empty, that even in the coldest world, there was light to be found. For Ice Age humans, the world was not still. It shifted with the seasons, with the movement of animals, with the freezing and thawing of rivers, with the slow march of glaciers that reshaped the land itself. To survive meant to move, sometimes short distances to find new shelter, sometimes across entire continents in pursuit of herds and warmth. Migration was not only necessity, it was a rhythm of life, one as natural as breath, but it was also perilous. Each step carried risk. Each journey was a gamble between survival and death. The need to move came first from hunger. Herds of reindeer, bison, and mammoth were never static. They roamed vast ranges, seeking fresh grazing grounds, following seasonal cycles of growth and thaw. Hunters had little choice but to follow. A missed migration meant empty bellies and empty fires. In this way, animals dictated the paths of humans, drawing families across plains through valleys and into new lands. Where the herds went, people followed, for in their hides lay warmth and in their bodies lay life. But food was not the only driver. Winters in the Ice Age were brutal, and some regions became entirely unlivable when snow deepened and storms raged. Families would abandon exposed sites, seeking valleys sheltered by cliffs, forests offering firewood, or caves hidden from the wind. Archaeological evidence shows seasonal camps, places occupied for only part of the year before being left behind. The pattern is clear. Movement was timed to the pulse of weather, an endless cycle of departure and return. These migrations were not small affairs. Entire families traveled together, parents, children, elders, and dogs, carrying their lives in bundles of hide and bone. Imagine the scene, a line of figures trudging across a frozen plain, cloaks whipped by wind, dragging sleds or carrying burdens on their backs. The cold bit at every step, yet the stop was a freeze. Behind them, an old camp buried in snow. Ahead, the hope of shelter, fuel, and game. Every journey was a test of endurance, each mile paid for in sweat and frostbitten fingers. The dangers were immense. Crossing frozen rivers risked sudden cracks beneath the ice. Blizzards could blind a traveler within moments, separating children from parents, hunters from companions. Wolves and cave lions shadowed the edges of migration paths, waiting for stragglers. Even without predators, exhaustion itself was enemy enough. To stumble and fall on the march risked never rising again. In such conditions, survival depended on cooperation. Families moved as one, elders supported by the strong. Children carried when their legs gave out. The journey was communal, each life tied to the others. Yet migration also carried promise. New lands held new resources. Caves unexplored, rivers rich with fish, plains where herds grazed undisturbed. Archaeological traces show humans reaching astonishing distances during the Ice Age, across Siberia, into Europe, even over the land bridge of Beringia into the Americas. These were not random wanderings. They were deliberate, guided by knowledge of seasons, of stars, of landmarks etched into memory. Ice Age people were not lost wanderers but skilled navigators, mapping the frozen world in their minds. The act of moving itself required preparation. Tools had to be portable, shelters easy to dismantle. Bone needles stitched hides into cloaks that doubled as bedding. Sinew cords tied bundles that could be carried long distances. Fire had to be preserved. Glowing embers carried in containers of bark or bone, shielded against wind. Even food was adapted for travel. Dried strips of meat, fat wrapped in hides, marrow-rich bones carried for later cracking. In these ways, migration became a mobile form of survival, a culture built to walk. Dogs, once they joined human journeys, became invaluable companions. They helped pull burdens, sniffed out danger, and provided warmth at night. Together, human and dog became a traveling partnership, each making the other stronger. The presence of dogs may have expanded the range of human migration, enabling groups to move faster, farther, and safer. Their tracks joined human footprints across the snow, a symbol of shared destiny in the frozen world. But movement was not only physical, it was cultural. As groups traveled, they carried with them not only tools and food, but stories, songs, and knowledge. Encounters with other bands led to exchanges of ideas, techniques, even mates. The Ice Age landscape was vast, yet migration ensured that humans were never entirely isolated. Networks of travel created networks of culture, connecting distant groups across plains and mountains. Survival was not only about where to walk, but about whom to meet along the way. Caves and campsites bear witness to this movement. Archaeologists find layers of occupation, hearts built, abandoned, and later rebuilt by new families. Flint tools from distant sources, carried hundreds of miles, prove that people range far. Shell beads found far from coast show that even ornaments traveled, exchanged hand to hand across migrating bands. Each object tells a story of movement, of lives lived in motion, of survival secured not in stillness but in endless journeys. There was symbolism, too, in migration. Myths may have framed journeys as sacred. Trails walked not only by humans but by ancestors and spirits. The stars overhead, steady even when landscapes changed, may have guided steps and stories alike. Rituals likely marked departures and arrivals, offerings to spirits of the land before setting out, prayers to animal guardians upon reaching a new camp. Migration was more than necessity. It was part of a worldview, a cycle that linked people to land, animals, and sky. The contrast of migration was sharp. On one side lay danger, hunger, storms, exhaustion, and death. On the other lay survival, new lands, fresh game, the promise of life. To stay too long meant starvation. To move meant risk. Every journey balanced between despair and hope, between the terror of exposure and the dream of warmth. In this contrast lay the courage of Ice Age humans, who chose movement again and again, even when fear whispered to stay. In many ways, migration was the ultimate act of resilience. It was not passive endurance, but active seeking. To walk into the unknown required faith, in skill, in memory, in one another. Each step pressed into snow was an act of defiance against the cold, a refusal to be trapped by ice and hunger. And each successful journey proved what humans had always been. Wanderers, survivors, creators of paths where none existed. The legacy of those journeys endures. Our species spread across continents not by waiting, but by walking. The same feet that trudged after reindeer on frozen plains eventually carried humans to every corner of the earth. Migration in the Ice Age was not just a strategy. It was the beginning of humanity's story as explorers, as seekers of warmth and life wherever it could be found. And so, the image of a band of humans crossing an endless field of snow is more than a picture of hardship. It is a symbol of persistence. It shows the will to keep moving when stopping meant death. It shows that survival was not only about enduring the cold, but about daring to walk through it, trusting that beyond the ice lay another dawn, another fire, another chance at warmth. When the sun sank below the horizon during the Ice Age, the world transformed. The pale light of day, harsh though it was, at least revealed the land, the cliffs, the frozen rivers, the scattered trees. But night stripped everything away. Darkness folded across the landscape, leaving only the hiss of wind, the crunch of shifting ice, the distant call of wolves. In that darkness, the cold grew heavier, more suffocating, as though the absence of light deepened the reach of frost. For prehistoric people, survival in these hours was not just physical. It was a battle of the mind. The body could endure a degree of suffering. Fire, furs, or the warmth of companions helped shield against the worst of the chill. But the mind, when pressed by shadows and fear, often threatened to give way. Anxiety sharpened every sound, turning the groan of ice into the imagined growl of a predator. The silence between gusts of wind could feel like a trap, as though something unseen lurked just beyond the circle of firelight. Sleep, vital for strength, was never easy when every creak of frozen would seem to promise danger. Fear of the cold was layered. On one level, it was physical. The knowledge that if embers died or blankets of hide shifted, frost could slip in and steal breath. On another, it was spiritual. Many Ice Age cultures likely saw the night as a place of spirits, of unseen forces, of ancestors or monsters that prowled in darkness. The chill of wind entering a cave may not have been felt merely as air, but as the presence of something supernatural. The psychology of night was bound to belief, and belief itself could intensify terror or provide comfort. Archaeological traces hint at rituals designed to ease this dread. Small carvings of animals, marked stones, and symbolic objects found near hearths suggest talismans against fear. To a prehistoric family huddled in furs, such tokens may have served as anchors of hope, physical reassurances that they were protected. Stories told by elders around the fire likely carried the same purpose. A myth of a spirit guiding hunters or of ancestors watching over the living may have softened the edge of darkness. In this way, culture worked as survival psychology, a means of calming hearts when bodies could not be fully safe. Group dynamics also shaped the psychology of cold nights. Loneliness was unbearable in such times. Isolation magnified every danger, but within a group, each person's presence was a shield against despair. The sound of another's breathing in the dark, the weight of a companion pressed close, reminded the frightened that they were not alone. Fear shared became fear reduced. Even children, though vulnerable, added strength. Their need to be comforted gave adults purpose, keeping minds from spiraling into panic. Survival was not only physical cooperation, but emotional bonding. The cold, however, still wore down the mind. Endless nights of shivering, endless mornings waking with frozen limbs, could drive people toward hopelessness. Fatigue dulled alertness. Hunger sharpened irritability. Arguments had sparked in the dark, fueled by exhaustion and stress. But such tensions had to be contained, for disunity threatened everyone. The psychology of cold nights was therefore also the psychology of patience, of restraint, of knowing that anger wasted energy while unity created warmth. Fire, when available, played a profound psychological role. Its glow did more than heat the body. It anchored the mind. Within its light, the imagination relaxed, shadows retreated, and the world seemed briefly tamed. Without fire, nights became more perilous. The absence of flame meant an absence of comfort, leaving minds exposed to every whisper of the wind. In such situations, humans turned inward, drawing on memory and hope. They reminded themselves of previous winters survived, of mornings that had always come, of the promise that even the longest night would pass. Sleep itself was another trial of the mind. To drift into unconsciousness required surrender, yet surrendering meant risking exposure or predator attack. Most likely, people slept lightly, waking often at sounds or shifts in temperature. Dreams in such conditions may have carried particular weight, blurring lines between reality and imagination. Visions of warmth or hunting success may have strengthened resolve. Nightmares, conversely, may have been taken as warnings. The Ice Age night was as much a landscape of the mind as of snow and ice. Children faced their own version of the psychology. Their fear of dark and cold mirrored the anxieties of adults, but they also absorbed strength from the calm of their elders. A reassuring story, a hand resting over their shoulders, or the warmth of a parent's body could transform terror into security. In comforting children, adults also comforted themselves, reinforcing belief that survival was possible. The psychology of night was thus intergenerational. The strength of one became the strength of all. Animals influenced the mental atmosphere of night as well. Wolves howling in the distance reminded people of the thin line between safety and death. Yet over time, familiarity with these sounds likely reduced panic. A known danger was less terrifying than an unknown one. The real test was in moments of silence, when a howl ceased and the world seemed to hold its breath. It was then that imaginations filled the void, conjuring threats where none might exist. The brain in darkness could become its own worst enemy. The contrast of night psychology lay between despair and determination. On one side was a suffocating sense of endless cold, of a night that might never end. On the other was the knowledge, hard-earned, that humans had always survived before. The memory of dawn rising, of frost glittering in morning light, served as the mind's defense against surrender. To hold on to that image of sunrise, to trust that warmth would return, was as vital as any blanket or fire. Resilience grew from repetition. Each night survived was proof that fear could be endured. Over generations, this became part of human psychology itself, an inherited toughness, a capacity to outlast suffering. The Ice Age demanded not only strong bodies, but strong minds, capable of facing endless darkness without breaking. That resilience, forged in nights of frost, would shape humanity long after the ice receded. In the end, the psychology of cold nights was not about the absence of fear. Fear was inevitable, even necessary, alerting people to danger. What mattered was the response. To turn fear into vigilance, to soften dread with story, to share anxiety until it weakened. These were the mental strategies of survival. The cold tested the body, but it tested the mind even more. And again, humanity passed that test, carrying within them the quiet strength of those who had endured the darkest nights. In the frozen silence of the Ice Age, survival was never an individual endeavor. The cold was too relentless, the nights too long, and the threats too constant for a single person to endure alone. Instead, the foundation of human endurance lay in bonds of family and community. It was within these bonds that warmth, strength, and resilience took shape. The Ice Age was not only a test of bodies against frost. It was a test of relationships, of whether humans could live, move, and survive together. At the center of this network was the family. Parents, children, grandparents, and siblings huddled together beneath hides, their shared body heat acting as the first and simplest shield against the cold. But this intimacy was more than physical. In such closeness, emotional ties deepened. The laughter of a child, the quiet stories of an elder, the presence of a parent standing watch. These reassured the group that they were not facing the night alone. In the hostile environments of the Ice Age, family warmth was both literal and symbolic, a reminder that survival was shared. Every member had a role to play. Adults hunted, crafted tools, and kept fires alive. Elders, though less able to travel, contributed in other ways, teaching survival skills, passing down knowledge of landscapes, and sharing stories that gave meaning to struggle. Children, while vulnerable, were also learners. They absorbed lessons by watching, practicing, and imitating. Their very presence was motivation. Each mouth fed was a reason for adults to keep fighting. Each life carried forward a continuation of the group's legacy. The family was not only a structured necessity, but a source of purpose. Beyond family, lay the wider community. Archaeological evidence suggests that Ice Age humans did not live entirely in isolation. Groups often met at certain places during migrations, rivers, hunting grounds, or sheltered valleys. These gatherings allowed for exchange. Tools, resources, mates, and knowledge flowed between bands. Such interactions strengthened survival, ensuring that no group remained cut off from innovation or genetic diversity. The bond of community, though sometimes temporary, formed a web of resilience stretching across the Ice Age world. In harsh winters, cooperation between families may have meant the difference between life and death. A single family could not always bring down a mammoth, but several working together could. A lone hunter might fail against a herd of bison, but coordinated effort brought meat enough for dozens. This cooperation demanded trust. Weapons were shared, strategies agreed upon, and rewards divided. Without fairness, resentment could fracture unity, threatening everyone. Thus, bonds of survival were not passive. They had to be nurtured with respect, reciprocity, and loyalty. Even within daily life, tasks were distributed to ease burdens. Some gathered firewood, while others prepared hides. Some set snares, while others tended children. This division of labor optimized survival, preventing exhaustion and ensuring that no single person carried all responsibility. In this system, dependence was not weakness but strength. Each role was essential. The weakest hunter might still be the finest hide worker, crafting garments that save lives. The injured elder might still guide others with memory of safe routes. In this interdependence lay balance. The psychology of belonging also mattered deeply. To feel part of a group gave individuals the courage to face what would otherwise be overwhelming. A lone human, surrounded by ice and predators, might despair. But within a circle of companions, fear softened into vigilance, and suffering became tolerable. Songs sung together, dances performed around fires, or rituals enacted at the change of seasons all reinforce unity. These acts may not have added meat or warmth directly, yet they strengthen morale, a survival tool as vital as any spear or cloak. Conflicts, of course, must have arisen. Hunger breeds tension, and cold exhausts patience. A dispute over food, over hunting rights, or over migration choices could tear at the bonds of kinship. Yet the necessity of unity likely kept such conflicts in check. Groups that fractured too severely risked annihilation. Thus, systems of resolution must have existed, whether through elder authority, group consensus, or ritualized compromise. Peace was not merely an ideal, it was survival. Kinship extended even into death. When a member of the group died, their absence left both emotional pain and practical strain. Yet many Ice Age burials suggest that the dead were honored. Graves lined with ochre, tools, or ornaments reveal care, even reverence. To grieve together was to reinforce community ties, acknowledging loss, but also affirming the value of those still alive. The act of honoring the dead bound the living more tightly, reminding them that every life mattered and that survival was not only about the present but about legacy. Family and community also expanded through bond with animals. Dogs, once domesticated, were welcome as companions and collaborators. They guarded camps, ate at hunts, and shared warmth in the night. Their loyalty became part of human kinship networks, extending the sense of family beyond the human species. In this partnership, survival gained yet another layer of resilience. The contrast within these bonds was stark. Isolation meant despair, vulnerability, and likely death. Connection meant hope, shared strength, and the possibility of enduring winter's cruelty. To be cut off from family or community was to face the Ice Age as prey, small and fragile. To remain within the circle of kin was to stand as part of a living shield, each life reinforcing the others. The bonds of survival were thus humanity's greatest invention, more powerful than fire, more enduring than stone. These connections also laid the groundwork for the future. Cooperation in the Ice Age became cooperation in villages, tribes, and nations. The lessons learned in frozen camps: that unity brings strength, that fairness maintains peace, that bonds endure even in hardship, became part of the human story. The warmth of family and community carried humanity not only through the Ice Age, but into the unfolding chapters of civilization itself. In the end, what preserved humanity against the cold was not only fur, fire, or food, but one another. In the embrace of kin, in the loyalty of friends, in the shared laughter even on the bleakest nights, humans found a power greater than frost. The Ice Age was survived not by solitary endurance, but by collective strength. Family and community with a heart of warmth in a world of ice. The invisible heart that burned within every band of humans who walked that frozen earth. The Ice Age is long past, yet its shadows remain in the story of humanity. We walk in a world warmed by modern comforts, surrounded by walls, fires that burn with a strike of a switch, food stored in abundance. Yet the memory of that frozen era lingers deep in our bones and our culture. To understand how our ancestors endured the coldest nights without certainty of fire is to understand the roots of what it means to be human. Their endurance was not only physical but emotional, spiritual, and communal. It shaped us. It gave us the resilience that carries forward into the present. From the struggle against frost, we inherit the knowledge that survival is never solitary. The Ice Age tested individuals with brutality few of us can imagine. Blizzards that froze the air itself, nights where breath crystallized in the dark, winds that howled like predators circling unseen. And yet, people endured. They endured because they learned to lean on one another. Families huddling together for warmth. Communities cooperating to hunt great beasts. Elders guiding with memory and wisdom. Their greatest weapon was not stone or spear, but connection. This lesson still echoes. Survival is not about strength alone, but about bonds. The legacy also lies in adaptability. Humans did not conquer the cold by resisting change, but by embracing it. They shaped hides into clothing, carved shelters from bone and snow, and carried glowing embers across miles of frozen landscape. They adapted to rivers that froze solid, to herds that shifted routes, to winters that deepened unpredictably. Adaptability was more than innovation. It was a mindset, a refusal to surrender. That mindset persists today. When we face uncertainty, whether in nature, in society, or within ourselves, the memory of Ice Age adaptability whispers that change is not defeat, it is survival. Fear was another inheritance. For our ancestors, fear of the night, of predators, of hunger was constant. But fear, far from being weakness, was a compass. It sharpened vigilance, kept fires tended, and encouraged cooperation. What mattered was not the absence of fear, but the management of it. Stories, rituals, and companionship softened its edge, turning dread into endurance. This lesson, too, remains. Fear is not an enemy to be destroyed, but a force to be understood and channeled. The Ice Age taught that survival meant walking with fear, not against it. In their struggles, our ancestors also discovered meaning. A mammoth hunt was not just a pursuit of food, but a collective triumph, woven into stories retold around the fire. The warmth of a shared hearth was more than heat. It was a symbol of unity, of belonging, of a fragile world held together against a vast cold. Even grief, when a member was lost, became ritual. Burials marked with ochre, tools, or beads, signs that death was not abandonment but continuity. These acts gave shape to survival, transforming existence from endurance into culture. Today, when we search for meaning in hardship, we are following a path carved long ago in ice and fire. The contrast of the Ice Age, cold and warmth, despair and hope, death and life, became the crucible in which humanity was forged. It was in the tension between these extremes that resilience grew. Without the relentless cold, the warmth of fire would not have felt so vital. Without hunger's threat, The sharing of food would not have carried such power. Without the long, dark nights, the presence of companion would not have meant so much. The Ice Age taught humanity to see life in contrasts, to find beauty in survival, and to recognize that even in the harshest conditions, light can emerge. Our modern world often distances us from those contrasts. Central heating shields us from frost, electric lights scatter darkness, and food is stored in refrigerators rather than hunted across plains. Yet the lessons endure. When disasters strike, when uncertainty looms, when isolation creeps in, the echoes of Ice Age nights return. We are reminded that endurance is possible, that cooperation saves, that adaptability wins, and that fear can be lived with rather than fled from. The bones of our ancestors carried us through glacial winters. Their spirit still carries us today. Perhaps the deepest legacy is humility. For tens of thousands of years, humans were small against the power of ice and wind. They were not masters of nature, but participants in its cycles, reliant on its mercy. They respected animals they hunted, honored spirits of the land, and acknowledged forces greater than themselves. This humility was part of survival, tempering confidence with caution, balancing ambition with reverence. In our modern age of control and technology, this lesson may be the most vital to recall. That endurance begins with respect for the world around us. The Ice Age also gifted us imagination. To survive its nights, humans told stories, painted images on cave walls, carved figures from ivory and bone. These acts were not luxuries but necessities, giving courage when the cold threatened to crush the spirit. Imagination created hope. Hope created endurance. And endurance carried humanity forward. Today, our art, our myths, our visions of the future all descend from those first sparks of creativity struck in caves while snowstorm winds raged outside. The cold may have threatened to silence humanity, but instead it gave rise to its voice. In the end, the legacy of endurance is not simply that humans survived. Many creatures survived the Ice Age, yet most faded or changed beyond recognition. What makes the human story unique is that we carried forward not only bodies but culture, not only breath but memory. We emerged from the frozen nights with lessons etched into our being. That warmth is precious, that unity is strength, that adaptability is life, and that meaning is as essential as food or fire. These lessons are timeless, speaking to us as clearly today as they did tens of thousands of years ago. So when we imagine those prehistoric families huddled together beneath hides, eyes fixed on the glowing embers, we are not only looking back, we are looking inward. Their endurance is ours. Their fears echo in our own anxieties, their resilience in our own determination, their bonds in our own families and communities. The Ice Age may be gone, but the human spirit it forged still burns, a fire that refuses to die, a warmth carried forward to the darkest nights, across the centuries, into the world we inhabit now.